I just love the solo format. I love the one-on-one format, and I love the ability to be able to have a great, consistent conversation.
We started both our podcasts actually together with Hussam as co-hosts. It's different, for sure. I prefer the flexibility of the solo hosting. Which one do you prefer? Co-hosting or solo hosting?
Solo hosting.
Why?
J. Craig Williams is the founder of the Williams Law Corporation. He's an experienced trial lawyer specializing in complex business litigation, environmental law, real estate, and technology.
He is also the author of the acclaimed book, How Would You Decide? And the host of the well-known legal podcast, Lawyer to Lawyer, where he explores today's most pressing legal issues with leading experts. He is recognized among the nation's top-rated lawyers for his excellence and leadership in the legal field.
The transformation for me happened when I got into commercial radio. I had spent some time in college working on PBS, which is very slow, and the way that you speak is very different than in commercial radio.
Podcast networks also weren't even a thing back then. You decided to go with the network, actually to be the first show of this network. Why going with the network right away?
The marketing aspect of it to me was very important. Also, the reason that I went with the network was largely because I didn't want to have to do it myself.
How did you manage the co-hosting? Did you have a list of questions that you were going to ask and then Bob was going to ask, or were you a bit going with the flow?
I think that was one of the most frustrating things about the beginning of our podcast together, because...
Craig, can you tell me the story of Lawyer to Lawyer podcast, please?
Wow, that's a big question. As a matter of fact, yesterday, we recorded our 20th anniversary episode.
This is crazy.
We had our original guest, Erwin Chemerinsky, was our very first guest. He's now the dean of Berkeley Law School. At the time that we interviewed him, he was a brand new dean of UCI, the University of California at Irvine, which I had helped get set up. But it was really interesting to have him on yesterday. We ran the gamut of every constitutional issue you could come up with. But to start out, August 5th, 2005. August 5th, 2005 was our very first podcast. It was Bob Ambrogi, who was a former editor of the National Law Review from Gloucester, Massachusetts, Rockport actually, and me from Southern California, just outside Los Angeles. We first called the show Coast to Coast, but a little bit along, you may have heard of the paranormal show by George Noory, Coast to Coast. And he was not happy that we were using his name, so he sent us a cease and desist letter. And as two lawyers, we tried to assuage our current network at the time, the Legal Talk Network, that everything would be all right. We would be able to handle it, but they were nervous as non-lawyers. So we changed our name somewhere in the very beginning to Lawyer because it made sense that we were one lawyer on the East Coast and one lawyer on the West Coast. We would typically, in the beginning of the show, interview two people. So two hosts interviewing two people in a half an hour. Really didn't leave for a lot of individual questions. Bob asked questions, and his style was, because it was a newspaper reporter, his style was the who, what, where, how, when, and why. My style was a little bit more inquisitive and kind of follows sometimes logic and sometimes not logic, whatever pops into my head. But we had two different styles, and somewhere along the line, I think probably about 5 years ago, Bob decided that he wanted to start his own podcast. He was more into legal marketing than I am. I was more of a, down and dirty trial lawyer going to court, and Bob kind of branched off into the aspects of legal marketing and some other things that really didn't interest me. So he separated. I continued along with the Legal Talk Network. We had been absorbed. Our company was originally just two broadcasters. They were a cameraman and a former newswoman from WBZ Radio and actually TV in Boston. And they had started a side company where they produced settlement videos for lawyers. They wanted a little bit of credibility, I would say, to their business. So we started with podcasting. They say it was their idea. I think it was my idea, but two of us together, they got a hold of me. I got a hold of them. We're not really sure how it started. We found Bob and just started a podcast. I think that there may be one podcast that is longer than ours. It started in April of 2005. So I think we are the second longest running podcast on the internet, certainly the longest continuously running legal podcast on the internet. And our current network is really cool. The Legal Talk Network has Our producer is in, at my last check, I think he was in Azores, or I think now he's in Madeira. Our producer, Kenny, she's in Boston. Our marketing director, or I think now lead, is in, I think, Wisconsin. And our owner is in Los Angeles. So we're quite spread out. We have 30 podcasts on the network now. We started as the first and still the flagship podcast. So we've been going strong. Our format is probably about a half an hour. Sometimes we go longer, and we will now interview just one guest. It allows for a more in-depth, like it is here, a little bit more in-depth conversation than you would otherwise have, allows us to track through some things. I guess that's pretty much the history of it. Here we are in 2025, 20 years later, and still going strong. I started in radio as a high school student when I was in ninth grade, 1971, if you want to do the math, and did the radio, and our high school had a TV studio. So I got involved with the TV studio, did the news broadcasts, was taught how to speak, learned to lose my accent, and ended up on a commercial radio show in local town, and also was a little bit of time with PBS in college. So that's how I got my experience getting into radio, and love to continue with doing podcast work.
So there is a gazillion thing I want to ask you, Craig. First thing is, I mean, it's not that podcast wasn't even hype 20 years ago. It's that the format was non-existent, right? I mean, you'd rather listen to radio and sometimes some replay of radio shows, right? And I remember this because when my mom used to take me to the conservatory, I'm not sure that's the right name, but like the music school, we were playing radio and sometimes replays of radio shows, but podcasting itself wasn't really a thing. What made you go that way, especially for somebody who was doing radio as well? Like, why podcast?
I had just started a law firm in 2003. I left a very large law firm and started my own practice. So I was looking for ways to establish my own credibility in the industry. And I was looking for a way to start marketing, something more unusual and something that fit with what I used to do. Podcasting is quite a bit like radio. I don't have all the gizmos and gadgets I had when I was in radio, although they're all most of them are on the computer. But, we had turntables to the left and right. We had cart machines and cart rack, mixing bar in front of us, along with a clock and an AP and a UPS machine. In the days when we used to get copy that rattled off the machines that sent news from Washington, D.C. The only source for news was a machine that spit it out on a piece of paper, and I would record radio, record video, record audio, do commercials, do the weather, and stick the cart machine in. But this is all different. Been a significant change. I'm looking at a very small box. It's a mixer that's about, a 100th of the size of the mixer that I used to work with. Significant changes in the industry, but it's been a lot of fun. I don't know if that answered your question.
I mean,
Kind of veered off topic.
No, but I love this. This is what this show is about. So, was the format is similar? There was also something happening, which is you were starting your own law firm, right? And I guess that's going to tie in with the other questions I want to ask you and what we want to discuss, which is your law firm, the podcast behind it, and so on. So maybe to go a bit further down the rabbit hole, podcast networks also weren't even a thing back then. Not yet, not as much of a thing as they are today, let's say. And you decided to go with the network, actually to be the first show of this network, the Legal Network, right?
Legal Talk Network, yeah.
Legal Talk Network, thank you. Why that choice? Why not deciding to just, do it yourself and not have to deal with somebody in Wisconsin and somebody in Chicago and somebody in Madeira and somebody in... You see what I mean? Like, why going with a network right away? Which is not a bad choice, by the way, but I'm just interested in understanding why you took this one.
I had a brand new law firm. We had brand new space that I had just purchased, purchased a lot of office equipment. I had secretaries and paralegals and lawyers working for me. My hands were full. And I had also at the same time started a blog. In fact, I had been doing a daily writing on my blog, which is really quite interesting because that blog got picked up by law.com, very big presence on the internet. And it was front page for probably about 4 or 5 years that I was writing it. So the marketing aspect of it to me was very important, but also the reason that I went with a network was largely because I didn't want to have to do it myself. I could get on my computer with a microphone that I could plug into my computer and a set of headphones, and they would do all the work. They did the editing, they created the website for it. Because they were TV people, they knew how to promote, they knew how to edit, they knew all of that stuff way better than I did because they were pros at it. It took that burden of production away from me, and it didn't cost me anything. I didn't pay them, they didn't pay me. It was a mutually beneficial thing. What we were doing as lawyers was establishing credibility for their business, and what they were doing for us was establishing credibility as lawyers on the podcast. It was an even trade that we both got involved with. Things changed after we got bought out. They saw some value in us, and so at that point, that's when I started talking to them about paying me to do the work, because at that point I was providing more of a benefit to them than they were to me because I was long established. I think we were 12, 15 years into it by the time we got bought out the first time.
I deal with certain podcast networks. We had some podcast networks creators on this show as well. And let me tell you, Craig, it's a bet, right? When you say, hey, let us take care of everything. When you say this as a network to a podcast, right? Because there is a cost to producing everything. And most of the time, because most of the podcasts don't really go a long way or don't really get lots of downloads, but like in your case, this is the best bet that the Legal Talk Network could have taken, because you're still here 20 years after. It's a mutually beneficial deal, right? Which is awesome. But it really makes me think of Nike and their deal with Jordan. It's like you couldn't really know it was a bet, but boy, did it pay off. So yeah, that's amazing. And as long as both parties are happy, I guess, lawyering 101, then it's a deal that makes sense. And you definitely get credibility thanks to the podcast. So another thing that I wanted to follow up on based on your first answer, Craig, is how did you manage the co-hosting? Because that's a question I often get from people wanting to start a podcast. Who should be the host? Should it be internal to a company, external? Should we co-host? Should I be the one interviewed, for instance, the CEO? Why did you go for a co-hosting format?
I think that the format of the co-hosting allowed or was more acceptable in that time frame in order to establish credibility. I mean, you used to have like Walter Cronkite, the news guru of the time, who came on the news, and his authority came with him. Neither Bob nor I were established as any kind of credible news people or interviewers outside of our chosen professions. I mean, certainly Bob was, because he was editor of the National Law Review. So he had that newspaper experience, and he knew how to ask those questions. And he was also a lawyer. So I think that the dual aspect of it, both of us being able to ask questions of the guest or both guests, provided a little bit more credibility than we would have had individually. And it gave some kind of flair to the show. I listened yesterday before I interviewed Erwin for our 20th anniversary show. I listened to the very first show with him. And the production in the beginning was, I think, was two lawyers from both coasts, one from Massachusetts, the other one from California. Imagine, see what's going to happen. So I gave them some kind of play, something to promote, as opposed to just an individual. And Bob and I worked together really well. We became good friends. Even though we were from opposite coasts, we would go to their office in Boston and do recordings. So we had met each other in person. We became good friends, and we played well off each other. The thought originally, I think, was that because he was from the East Coast, that he would be more conservative, and I was from the West Coast, I would be more liberal, or even the other way around. It turned out that we were both fairly liberal. And so the conservative to liberal play that we kind of anticipated happening in the beginning didn't happen. But even now, I think every script that I get from my producer has a statement in it that says devil's advocate questions. Don't forget to ask the questions on the other side of what you might think personally in terms of being able to do it. So I try now as a single host to try and emulate the hosting of two people by asking the more conservative questions Yesterday's question with Erwin, and he and I are good friends. We've known each other for a long, long time. We've worked together at UCI, but I asked him some hard questions, some questions that as a liberal I would probably not think to ask, but because of the format of the show, that it's an historical format, I've tried to stay with that kind of give and take on both sides, to not just be a podcast that is solely one perspective and one view. I try to make people think of what the other perspective might be.
Which one do you prefer? Co-hosting or solo hosting?
Oh, solo hosting.
Why?
It really gives you more of an opportunity for control. It gives you more of an opportunity for a consistent conversation. For a long time, the format of the show has 2 commercials in it. So I have always in the middle of the show, when I first started it, and it was the way we first started with Bob, we used to interrupt the show and say, and now a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back. And then we would say, and now we're back with so-and-so, after a short pause so that the editor could insert the commercial later. We didn't make the guests listen to the commercial. But now, because we have a spectacular editor, and I won't say his name because he's not on the internet, and he's insistent that he's never on the internet and never mentioned, but he is our master editor, who's off in Madeira as a digital nomad. He had suggested at one point that we just skip the commercials in the conversation, and I'll record them after, like you're going to record the introduction for this show after you and I have talked. I do the same thing with the commercials. I do the same thing with my introduction now, so that it's a straight half an hour conversation or 40-minute conversation. There are no interruptions. And what a change that is. The time flies by. I don't pay any attention to it. I have to stop and take a look at the clock to make sure I'm staying on track, because we always have like a wrap up a few minutes before the end of the show. But I just love the solo format. I love the one-on-one format, and I love the ability to be able to have a great, consistent conversation. And like you said before we started, you may mute the call, and you're going to sit there typing some questions. I do the same thing, but because I'm old school, I write them out by hand. And yeah, there you are. Good. I'm glad to see it. Not completely tech bro, but
I'm sure you are.
But that's why it's a way better conversation with just one-on-one, without any interruptions at all.
So I couldn't agree more with, about the interruptions, right? Like, game changer. We started both our podcasts actually together with Hussam as co-hosts. So I have a bit of experience myself here. It's different for sure. I prefer the flexibility of the solo hosting. Indeed, you can really let your mind go wherever you want it to be, and ask the questions straight away. Which leads to my next question. How did you manage the co-hosting? Did you have a list of questions that you were going to ask and then Bob was going to ask, or were you a bit going with the flow? Did you have a play with your co-host when you wanted to follow up on something that one of the guests was saying? For instance, with Hussam, when we were in the same room, it was like a small tap of the foot, that couldn't be seen nor heard. But it's like, hey, I go next because I have something I want to ask, and you don't interrupt the flow. How did you do it?
I think that was one of the most frustrating things about the beginning of our podcast together, because we didn't have a plan. There was no toe tapping because he was in Boston and I was outside LA. It was just, we would get a script, and we've always gotten a script. I still get a script with the questions in it, suggested questions, just kind of thought provokers. I've never followed the script. I don't ask the exact questions, but they prompt me to think so that I ask questions that are related to it. The script also gives me some links to current articles about what this person's written, about their bio, and so on and so forth. But the co-hosting aspect of it, in terms of bouncing questions back and forth, was really difficult, especially because in podcasts, guests tend to talk, and they talk for a long time, like I've been talking. I mean, you've been asking a few questions, but I'm largely dominating the conversation, as our guests do when they come on. So that leaves little time for questions for Bob to ask and little time for questions for me to ask, especially when you have 2 guests. And the format in the beginning, kind of to jump back to a question that you had asked earlier about co-hosting, we tried to get a conservative guest and a liberal guest. But those questions end up being long answers. And when you have a conservative and a liberal, they argue with each other, which doesn't leave any time really for the host to ask questions. In a half an hour, with Bob and two guests would maybe ask one or two questions, maybe three. So it was difficult to get an edge in a half an hour and get a word in. That was kind of a frustrating thing to me in terms of being a co-host and not having kind of any ability to be able to play. Bob had great questions. Guys been interviewing people his entire life as the editor of a National Law Review and a writer. So my experience with asking questions is, different. I ask questions in depositions and in trials, so they're more pointed. It's kind of a lot of fun thing to do. And it's great training because as a lawyer, I've been trained to ask questions and I have 40 years of practice at it. So now when I do an interview, I'm really getting at, I think, what people want to hear, what I want to hear. And I've learned that what I want to hear is the same thing what people want to hear. We all read, a raft of articles as we go through the day in the news and so forth. But it's co-hosting and asking questions. I think it's so much better to be a single host and be able to ask questions in the flow of a conversation as you have been.
What kept you going for 20 years?
My love for it. I absolutely love it. My ninth grade teacher through 4 years of high school, JF, Jim Fogarty, now the superintendent of the local school district where we are at the time. He was a teacher who was just starting out. He instilled in me the love for radio. My wife will kid with me because when I get on the phone, especially with a woman, she says I lower my voice. I use my radio voice. I try to, sound a little bit different. And now you're listening to my radio voice. I don't think it's the same as my speaking voice. My wife's over there wagging her finger at me going, no, it's not. My speaking voice, I think, is a lot of higher. But I got to work in radio when it was really cool because I got my hands into working in a television studio. I learned how to build equipment. Like I could sit down and build a receiver with transistors and capacitors and, all the resistors and all the parts that you need to build it. I can sit down and solder it and build it and put it together. I used to be able to. I don't think I could do it anymore. But that kind of thing, I got my third-class federal communications license as a radio broadcaster while I was in high school. No longer offered. The FCC no longer licenses broadcasters, but they used to. So I'm a rarity in the sense that I still hold a broadcasting license from the United States government. I think a transformation for me happened when I got into commercial radio. I had spent some time in college working on PBS, which is very slow. And the way that you speak is very different than in commercial radio. If you've listened to PBS, you'll know that, they'll sit there and say, well, today we're going to listen to Bob Dylan's fifth album where he got to, and it's very different style of speech. And it drove me crazy because it was not my style. But when I got into commercial radio, it was my style. And we had a guy on our commercial radio station. His name was Charles Graves. And he taught me how to use equalizers. We had an equalizer for the left channel, an equalizer for the right channel for stereo, and how to change your voice using the equalizers, and also how to speak and lower your voice. So it was really a combination of JF and Charles who molded my voice. I used to, in high school, I had to read the front page of the newspaper back when newspapers were published as regular pieces of paper. I would sit down with my teacher in class as part of class and read and he would correct my pronunciation and enunciation and make sure that I would say the entire word. So I had a lot of training that enabled me to be able to speak clearly, and I think has been the basis for me being a lawyer and being a trial lawyer. That if I hadn't been taught how to speak and get in front of a microphone and get in front of a camera and be on television, I don't think I would have had the confidence to be able to get up and talk to jurors and judges and opposing counsel in court like I do now.
And I guess it feeds onto each other, right? You being asking questions in depositions, at trial, helps you be a better podcaster. You asking questions and interviewing whilst being a podcaster helps you be a better lawyer when you need to ask questions. Listening skills as well, a big thing. So you love it. What makes you love this?
Well, that's a deep philosophical question.
That's what we're for.
Never really thought about that question.
Interesting.
I think starting out in high school and working with a lot of electronic equipment turned me into a geek and a gizmo guy. I am forever putting gizmos in the house and smart home thing. And I went to college when I was in high school at Penn State University, and I took a class in programming. I learned how to program in Fortran, and I learned how to program in COBOL. So a lot of early geekiness of equipment and computers and radio and television fit in all into that, because we had nothing. We had a production studio. We had 2-inch tapes. We had a mixing board. We had cameras. We had lighting. We had studio effects. We had a raised floor so that we could pick stuff up and run wires from equipment to equipment underneath it. I mean, we were a full-on television studio. In high school, we would go out and we did the Thanksgiving Day parade. We put cameras on the street in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, a little small town. But, high school students we had a boom camera. We had a camera on the street. We had audio engineers. We had recording engineers. It was a full-on production level. We went out to Deer Lake and recorded a commercial with Muhammad Ali for Jerry Lewis Telethon on Labor Day. We went up to television antenna in the Pocono Mountains, and we interrupted the signal that came from New York that was broadcast into Pennsylvania, and we all did this with permission, of course, because we had to get into a locked building. But we interrupted the signal and the microwave tower, television microwave tower. We put in our parade, and we put in the interview that we had done with Muhammad Ali. He even came to one of our football games and did the kickoffs as an honorary thing for that commercial that we did. I got into the ring with him and did a little bit of boxing. So
This is crazy.
it led to a lot of experiences. I mean, to go into a television broadcasting transmitter station that is just a square block building in the middle of the mountains, on the top of the mountains, that you have to go through the cyclone gates to get into, and then unlock the door to get into, and then it's nothing but television equipment inside this thing. And we were there for the whole weekend during the Jerry Lewis Telethon, doing this for 4 years. So it became, I don't know, it was a blast. As a kid in high school, being able to do those kind of things was just amazing. And what it told me was that radio and television and communications, my undergraduate degree at James Madison University is in communication arts, radio, TV, film. That was a great way to get to play with all of this equipment that I love to play with for free. People just bought stuff, and here is this fantastic piece of equipment that I get to play with and do things like podcasts and talk to tons of people every month. It's a blast.
You don't need to convince me. Which one do you love the most, podcasting or lawyering?
Well, if I had my druthers and if somebody paid me what I make as a lawyer to be on the radio, I would do that, because I love being on the radio. I like being a lawyer. The level of intellectual challenge that you get as a lawyer is not anywhere near what you get on podcasting. I mean, sure, it's fun to interview people, but like I'm working on right now an environmental contamination case in south of Los Angeles that is, it's going to be 10 years worth of litigation to try and resolve. So that kind of stuff is really a lot of fun and very stimulating.
So let's talk a bit about business then. You mentioned that one of the reasons you partnered with that network was because they were going to help you establish authority as a lawyer in the podcasting world, and as a lawyer, you were helping them build authority in the podcast world as well. And you said, I've benefited greatly from my podcast. I don't pay them anything. They don't pay me anything, but like the amount of authority, and I guess therefore brand, potentially leads and cases coming through the podcast is worth your while. how much would you say the podcast benefited your career as a lawyer?
It has given me a lot of respect that I think that I would not otherwise have. And it's priceless. I can't put a number on it. First of all, it's given me a lot of connections with people. Over 20 years, I've interviewed an awful lot of people. We don't really stay in touch, but when I get to places and, they refer things to me, I refer things to them, it's mutually beneficial. And, I remember a significant number of all of them. So that's been great. I've had a 20-year relationship with my producer. She started with me, Kate Kenny. She's still with me. We have gotten together when she comes out to California, when I come out to Massachusetts where she lives. She comes down to the Cape. We see each other. We've become good friends. I've watched her child grow up. She's watched my grandchildren grow up. Those kind of relationships that get established. I mean, I'm still good friends with Scott Hess, our original cameraman, producer, Luann Reeb, and many of the people that have come in as audio engineers over time. But in the industry, it's easy for us to get guests because we've been on for so long. People want to be on the show. Every day I get 3 or 4 requests for guests to come on the show by email, which most of them I blocked by now, most of the marketing people, because all they're really doing is trying to promote their guy. I mean, I got an email this morning, some Florida lawyer who's great at what he does wants to come on my podcast. Well, that's good, but tell me what you're going to talk about. I interview by subject matter and current subject matter. So we will talk about the current Supreme Court cases and so forth. It's been an education for me. That has been invaluable. It has forced me to read and stay involved in politics so that I understand what's going on. So many aspects of podcasting have played into my life that it's difficult to kind of quantify all of them, I think. Just in terms of the money, if you want to talk about what it does, I mean, I have a blog, a highly recognized blog. I don't write much of it anymore. I've published 3 books. My first book was a compilation of some of the blogging that I'd done, which led me to be able to publish other books. So this marketing business in law of being on podcast or a podcast host, being a guest on a podcast, writing a blog, all of those kind of things lend credibility to who you are. And they certainly provide value. You'd have to ask a client, I guess, why did you hire Craig? And I've had a couple tell me, a couple have said to me, well, have you seen your resume? Because I'm a double board certified trial lawyer. I established an entire area of law of contributory copyright infringement as one of my cases that allows musicians and actors and people on stages to be paid for their streaming performances. Hadn't been for my case, none of the people that sell their music catalogs, including Taylor Swift and Bruce Springsteen, would be able to sell those catalogs because Napster would still be ripping them off as free music, and there would still be an underground current, and there would be no law to prevent those people from ripping off the things. But that was a law that in a case that I happened to establish, and so it gave me instant credibility as an intellectual property lawyer thing. And they've surprised me by saying, whoa, you're a god in the industry because of this case. And I'm like, it's an appellate case. All I did was, argue a case, but it has had a rather substantial effect. I mean, Bruce Springsteen has $550 million for his music catalog because of me, or because of my case. So where does podcasting and where's blogging and book writing and all of this marketing and all of it play into it? It's a component of it. One lends credibility to the other, to the other, to the other. So I can't really sit there and tell you that because of podcasting, I've made a lot of money. I think that what it's done is established me as an expert, perhaps, in asking questions, or at least somebody who's consistent enough to have been done a podcast for 20 years. That speaks volumes. And we have a significant number of listeners as a consequence of it that we've drug along with us over this time.
So with that being said, Craig, what's the number one recommendation you'd give to podcaster and wannabe podcasters? But let me refine a bit this question. I love this take from Jeff Bezos, right? Which is when he was building Amazon, the question that they were trying to answer was not what's going to be true in 10 years, or like what's going to change in 10 years, but more what's not going to change in 10 years. Well, customers will still want cheap, fast, good customer service. So if we do as much as possible there, we will still be in place. And I'm trying to get the learnings and the lessons from podcasters who've walked the talk, pun intended, and literally in your case, 20 years, happy anniversary. So what's that one thing that you think will still be true in 10 years, you who've been in the space for 2 decades now, that podcasters and wannabe podcasters need to double down on today?
Your format. I think of anything that a podcaster can do, and everybody has a different niche. Ours is legal news. So we stay current on legal news, which isn't hard these days because of politics and the way that the world is. Any number of subjects can be picked from the milieu that's out there. It's the same with somebody who does podcasting. Like, let's say my wife has a Cricut, which is one of those machines that cuts things out and makes mugs and things like that. Each industry changes. Each industry advances. New things come along. People want to stay informed about everything that's new, about learning. People are curious, I think, as a whole. I think the one thing that podcasting answers for people is curiosity. I want to learn more about this. I can find a podcast about anything these days. When we started, it was only legal news and maybe one other thing. But now there's a million different podcasts that you can find about the hair on your face, about how I should trim my beard, and then how I should be a man. And, should I have long hair like I have now? Or should I have there's all kinds of podcasts about everything. So the one thing is curiosity. Stay current, pursue the new stuff, let people know about it, and stay consistent with what you're doing. When you hear lawyer, you're going to know that it's a legal podcast. You're going to know that it's 2 lawyers talking together. Now the format is not just 2 lawyers hosting, but it's 2 lawyers talking. Me as a lawyer and another lawyer as a guest. So curiosity, to answer your question.
Craig, this was an absolute masterclass. If people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
I have a URL, jcraigwilliams.com, just a single letter J, CraigWilliams. That gives you pretty much everything that you could want to find about me. It links you to my law firm. It will link you to my books. It will link you to my podcast. Or you could just put my name in the internet and I'm there, because I've been there for a long time.
Well, even if you have been here for a long time, we're going to put all the links in the description, so people just have to click. Craig, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Thank you for having me. This has been a real pleasure.